Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Anyegolu. So, how important is it to recognize the need for fundamental human rights reforms in Nigeria, a country that is noted not so much for its human rights, but for its human wrongs? As the campaigns accelerate towards the elections, how important is it for the issue of human rights to be on the agenda and for the candidates to incorporate the promotion of such rights and values into their manifestos? Well, a new book has been published titled The Dogs and the Baboons, the Human Rights Revolution Nigeria Needs, which describes human rights awareness in this country as being at its lowest level. It cites everything from the setting ablaze of thieves in the marketplace to the lynching of a person for alleged blasphemy as examples to show that Nigerians know very little about human rights. And significantly, as Nigeria heads towards 2023, it wonders how people can praise the same leaders that impoverish them, something that it says is a fundamental human rights violation. Well, the author of that book is the UK-based Nigerian author and law lecturer, Dr. Allwell Uwazuruike, and he joins me now from our studios in London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and really nice to see you. Let me start by asking you why you've called your book The Dogs and the Baboons. What's the significance of that title?
Well, thank you very much, Charles. Thanks for having me on the program. I always like to say that I borrowed that title from our president, Muhammadu Buhari, when in 2011 he said that if what happened in 2011 repeated itself in 2015, referring to alleged election rigging, the dogs and the baboons will be soaked in blood. I found that very interesting, and I asked myself, what are the dogs and what are the baboons? I mean, apparently not the president's relatives or children, but, the masses, the people who always involve themselves in this, bloodshed during elections. And I found that really interesting. And that's what my book is about, the dogs and the baboons. Do we need dogs and baboons? Do we need those, do we need violence? Do we need all those human rights infractions that happen during, before, after elections in Nigeria? So yes, I owe that to the president.
Well, that's a very interesting title, and I have to say that it certainly caught my attention when I saw it. So what can you tell us about your book and how important it is likely to be to the human rights movement in Nigeria?
Yes, I think my book is about creating human rights awareness. And as I say in the book, I noticed that even during election campaigns, human rights is not at the forefront of discussions. And I believe, I may be a bit biased because this is my field, but I believe that human rights is probably the most important issue in Nigeria now. And there is no way we can solve the problems in Nigeria without giving very serious attention to the issue of human rights.
And in a sense, human rights has become your vocation, hasn't it? Growing up as you did in a home where your father was a prominent human rights activist and you saw him arrested and often jailed without trial. I mean, how hard was that for you during that time?
Yes, I like to say that I did not have a normal childhood. I mean, there were moments when we stopped going to school because the police was after my father, and on one occasion we had to literally, live in the bush. Like, we left our home, we fled because the police was after us. We were out of school for months, and I was about 9, 10. So this really affected me. I grew up, seeing people one day, and then the next day they had been shot dead because they participated in a protest. I grew up, having my father locked up in prison for months without trial. Sometimes he would be bailed, as we're seeing with Nnamdi Kanu now, and not be released. The judgments of the courts were not followed. So I was always interested in human rights, and this was why, I took interest in this topic. I studied it. I did a PhD on human rights, and I looked at the topic in-depthly, and I saw that, I mean, for us to solve Nigeria's problems, really, human rights should be at the root of the solutions. And here, I'm not referring solely to the government, also the people. You know, we need what I call a human rights acculturation. People need to be marinated in human rights. It needs to flow in our veins, you know. For instance, if we could have a bet, let's go to the market and let's pretend I've stolen something, and you just shout, thief, thief. What's going to happen? 90% chances is that I'm going to get lynched and burnt, you know, because people believe this is the right thing, this should be done. Even in the schools, you know, our education system, there's no, you know, human rights philosophy. In the schools, teachers will lay students out on the floor and, you know, whip them 12 lashes on the back, treat them like animals. This violence, this culture of violation, you know, is transmitted because those students, those kids know, they believe that, well, if I'm in a position of authority, if I'm stronger than someone, then I can always inflict pain and violence on them. And when they grow up, when they become parents or bosses, what do? They also inflict pain on lesser members of the society. So we are encouraging a culture of violence, a culture of impunity. So we need to start from the grassroots, you know, from the schools. We need to teach kids, look, you're entitled to these things. You have a right to this. You should not be treated in a certain way. We have to make human rights a way of life.
So it's very interesting and very poignant. The examples you used in the book, you talked about, and you gave that example now, you know, lynching someone for stealing, you know, something in a marketplace, or someone who is alleged to have blasphemed, beating them to death, lynching them, and all the rest of it. But you also made a very interesting point that beyond the obvious human rights violations, police brutality, lynchings, you talked about the more subtle ones, namely how people praise the same leaders who impoverish them. Can you explain more about how that is a human rights violation?
Yeah, so when we talk about human rights, we have different classes of human rights. There's another class we call socio-economic rights. You know, you talk about the right to food, the right to housing, and people don't know that they have a right to access the basic amenities of life. You know, you don't praise the government for building a road or a bridge. It's their duty. It's not their money. They are there to make provisions for those basic amenities like drinking water, food. I mean, if you, in other, you know, developed communities and countries, you see that there's always provision there's a benefit system, provision for a welfare system, which we are lacking in Nigeria. And when a politician builds one hospital, people are lavishing him or her, you know, with praises. We are entitled to those things. I mean, technically, socioeconomic rights are not justiciable in Nigeria, but, you know, that's a very poor standard. Because if we look at some of our African neighbors like South Africa and Kenya, they have socio-economic rights justiciable in their constitutions. So we need to start asking the right questions. We need to up our standards a bit, you know. We should not praise leaders that impoverish us and use poverty as a tool. That's why during elections you see them dishing out 1,000 naira notes. No, I mean, you know, we are sort of helping them maintain the system of impoverishment.
Yes, and that's a very important point. And I wonder if your book and the human rights issues it draws attention to is particularly significant now that the election campaigns are underway in Nigeria.
Most definitely, because I mean, when you just go through social media, people are discussing the wrong things. People are discussing, where is this person from? What's their religion? How does that help you? I mean, if I pick the common man in the streets and I ask him, okay, if this man becomes president, he's not from your tribe, he's not, you know, of your own religion, and you have food to eat, you know, food commodities are cheaper, you have security, peace of mind, wouldn't you prefer that? I want to believe the common man, the average person, would say yes. So we're not, you know, talking important things like police reform. When I say police reform, I don't even refer to state policing, which some governors bring up because they just want control of the police. I'm referring to the police knowing their limits, knowing about human rights enforcement. Not a policeman that thinks because you're a suspected criminal, you can be beaten, you can be tortured in prison, you have to pay money for bail, you're not going to be charged to court. No, we need a police force with personnel that are appraised regularly on human rights. So we need to know discuss the right issues, and as being an election season, we need to make sure that these issues are at the forefront of discussions.
Yes, because I was going to ask you, what could the presidential candidates do to help human rights in Nigeria? How can they tangibly change things?
Okay, I can give 3 or 4 main points. Firstly, massive police reform. The police need to be educated weekly. They need seminars on human rights because they are the first port of call, right? They need to be appraised regularly. Secondly, the right to life, human dignity is paramount. So we need, whenever there's a violent death, whenever a person is killed, there must be inquest, public inquiries, and then we need education. And when I say education, I mean human rights education. Finally, we need justiciable, enforceable socioeconomic rights.
And I like the way you put things very succinctly and to the point. So writing your book is a way to make a point and to draw attention to the human rights situation in Nigeria. Do you think it'll make much difference to the lives and freedoms and human rights prospects of people living in Nigeria?
Yes, if the some of the recommendations I prefer are followed, definitely, and which is why we don't make a lot of progress, because we don't even know what standards we are working towards. I believe that if we adopt a human rights approach to solving Nigeria's problems, then we'll see a lot of results, because some of these issues are not necessarily resolved with huge financial war chest. We just need to get basic things right, basic understandings of human dignity and value of human life.
Okay, and the book is, of course, called The Dogs and the Baboons, The Human Rights Revolution Nigeria Needs. The author of that book is the UK-based Nigerian law lecturer, Dr. Allwell Uwazuruike, and he was talking to me there from our studios in London. Thank you very much indeed.